Joanne.
Sorry.
How are you? I haven't seen you forever, my friend.
It has been a while. How are things going at Luther?
They are going. Coaching is really it's keeping me busy.
I'm sure it is.
I'm keeping Dina busy too. She's been busy helping me evaluate classes. So
Thank you, Dawn. I love it. It's a privilege.
Good morning, Pastor Matt.
Oh,
Good morning, Pastor Casey.
hello.
Good morning, Andreas. Hi, Pastor Diana. Good to see you.
Hello.
Good morning.
Sorry, I'm late.
You're not late. It's okay. Oh, we are going to go ahead and begin though, just so that we honor everybody's time. So let me begin with our welcome. This is our 43rd online gathering for Synod rostered and lay leaders. We offer this monthly gathering called Coaching for All Seasons, and it's sponsored by your Pacifica Synod coaches. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah Tees. I am the coach coordinator for Pacifica Synod, and I'll be one of your facilitators today. Our coaching team has cultivated this monthly gathering for church leaders across the Pacifica Synod, and we hope you find this helpful as you navigate caring ministry in your communities. This is meant to be a time of insight and learning, and it's meant to be a brave space for you where you can feel capable of safely acknowledging who you are and how you are doing. I would like to introduce you to my fellow coach, Carol, and Carol will be introducing our presenter today. Carol, thank you so much.
You're so welcome, Sarah. And thank you, Dawn, for being with us. It's my privilege to introduce Dawn today. Dawn Alitz is, I hardly know where to begin, so I'll start with her written bio. Her expertise is in the area of adult faith formation, coaching, and program coordination. Before joining Luther Seminary staff in 2016, she spent over 20 years gaining experience in congregational leadership in both Mission Start and established programs. For those of you who aren't familiar with coaching credentialing, she is credentialed by the International Coaching Federation, which is not, I can attest, necessarily an easy thing to do. And she is also currently training with the Red Team Thinking program with a focus on agile coaching for coaches and nonprofits. And I want to hear more about that at some point, Dawn, because I only know a little. She's well known within ELCA and ecumenical circles for her work with adaptive leadership, developing online learning opportunities, and collaborating with various networks of educational and synodical professionals. I can attest to that because I participated for several years in a monthly Zoom forum that Dawn hosts. And there are representatives, coaches from several different denominations who meet regularly, people I would never have met and formed relationships with otherwise. So thank you for that. Dawn's role at Luther places her in a unique position to equip leaders to engage in the gospel in the 21st century by designing, piloting, and building out new business models for theological education and congregational leadership. My experience with Dawn in the forum that I mentioned is that she approaches research in that quintessentially Lutheran way by asking, what does this mean? So Dawn, would you please take it away?
yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for inviting me. This will be a What Does It Mean Day. Because earlier this winter, I saw the data, first of all, last fall. A report was released by the Hartford Institute of Religion and Research that talked about the difficulties of being pastoral leaders right now. And I'm going to share some of those slides and some of those findings with you, and then share what we at Luther Seminary have been deepening into, leaning into with our own adaptive leadership team, and share some of our thoughts. Because it's a fairly small group online, I will open it up to ask what you're thinking as we go through parts of this. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh, host, can you let me have the screen share?
You should be good.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. And we're calling this one for right now, Finding Light in a Liminal Space. We know that things are changing. So as we go forward, I'm just let's put out there so we know all the things that are there. We know right now that we are trying to pastor and lead in a country that is finding itself divided for political reasons. We are still coming out of the effects of the pandemic. And part of those effects of the pandemic can be seen in our churches looking and feeling differently as far as fullness, as far as activities. And this is a picture that I took when I was in Tijuana. We are still dealing with with items of race, of different kinds of equality and inequality. And all of these play into who we are as leaders and how we feel, just our own integrity and our own ability to be effective in proclaiming the gospel. So knowing that that is all true, I share with you the report that I mentioned earlier. At the end of this, I've asked Sarah to drop into the chat or to share with you via links the actual report, as well as some other materials. So you don't have to worry about necessarily taking copious notes while I speak. You can just listen and let your brain think about what you're hearing. These first couple slides are going to have a lot of text, just because I wanted to pull some of the findings from this research. The further we are from the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, the more we observe larger percentages of clergy pondering alternatives to their present congregation or vocation or both. In the fall of 2023, over half of religious leaders, 53%, have seriously considered leaving pastoral ministry at least once since 2020. And this is nearly 20% more clergy than in 2021, when 37% reported having such thoughts. And so before I go into the next few slides, I want to say out loud, I don't know where you are on this scale. You might be one of the ones who is finding it difficult to think about staying in your congregation or staying to be a pastor. You might be someone who really feels like this is your calling and you love your congregation. And you can take this as information of how to walk with your colleagues or how to think about working with your own congregation. But I want to say that I'm aware of, I don't know who exactly is in the room at this time. I apologize for the tiny numbers. I'm pulling this from their report and I could not get it any larger. So I will try to do as much clarification as I can. This is what median in-person worship attendance is looking like right now. This is not just Lutheran or mainline. It goes across several different denominations. Again, I'll put that entire report into your hands. But we can see that in 2000, which doesn't seem that long ago, at least to some of us, the median in-person worship attendance was 140. And that there was a huge dip during the winter of 2021, and now they finished their last data collection in February of 2023, and it has bounced up a little bit, but it's back on its way back down. And so if you are experiencing this in your congregation, you are not alone. This is something that is across the country, across tradition and denominational lines. Another piece to recognize is that they measured congregational willingness to change. And the blue and the red, the blue is that people agreed that they were willing to change, and the red is they strongly agreed to change. And one of the things that caught the researchers' eyes, that while there was a moment during the pandemic where people became very willing to change and try new things, that moment has passed. And in fact, in some ways, people have become less willing to change than they were even prior to the pandemic. So if you feel like you have all sorts of great ideas and you are finding it difficult to have people come along with you, that too is a common experience across our churches. All right, I'm actually going to stop here for a second. I'm going to stop the screen share. Are there any questions about just that little brief look into those stats? You experience them, you don't know if you've experienced them, you wonder what they are.
Dawn, how large a sample is involved in this study?
Oh, I don't know the exact number, Joanne, but it's actually quite large. This was run by the Hartford Institute of Religion and Research and Lilly. And so they took all of their influence across the country. And so it's not a small sample size by any means. And again, that's a piece that you'll be able to see more clearly when you see the whole report.
Okay, thank you.
For this particular purpose, I'm just sort of giving you a setting for two reasons. One is to say that we know that the world has changed, and it's not just changing for you if this is your experience. Or if it's not your experience, the people around you aren't crazy when they say, I don't understand what's going on. Yeah. It's a point of coming alongside you as leaders.
John, I wonder if it would be fair to say that some of these trend lines were already well underway before COVID, and that created some changes in how things were being done and our perception of what was going on. And now and in some ways accelerated some things that were already happening. And now we're just kind of coming out of that it's plateauing a bit, but it was already happening before 2020.
Yes, thanks, Carol, for bringing that up. These trends were already well underway before the pandemic. The pandemic really just accelerated it, broke some things that were sort of hanging on by a thread, or some people who had been attending just out of feeling dutiful or trying to go for their family members. When that opportunity or when that habit got broken during the pandemic, they didn't feel a big call to come back. And so some of the lower numbers, some of the changed programming is not nearly so much about the pandemic. It's that some of the facades that were there, some of the artificial things that were happening in church, quit working, and they didn't start working automatically when the pandemic was over. It also will let you know, the pieces that I'm going to show you next are some of the ways that Luther Seminary has been leaning into some of these shifts. These were already in process of being discovered and articulated even as the pandemic started. We were already working with some groups with how to do some adaptive work, some agility work, and because things sort of broke down so much during the pandemic, it gave us gave us more sightlines and gave us maybe some clear ideas on how to now navigate these changes. I'm going to go ahead and go back to sharing my screen. So then, as we keep moving, we have been thinking about ways to help leaders think about moving into this time. And what we have come up with are the 4 key pivots. And these are shift on posture, focus, structure, and leadership that we believe will help leaders follow God into a hopeful future. I've also given this document to Sarah to drop in at the end. So again, just feel free to listen and open up with questions as they come up. So these 4 key pivots are the pivot in posture from fixing to listening, which includes discerning and experimenting. The second one is a pivot in focus from membership to discipleship. A pivot in structure from one shape fits all to a mixed ecology. And a pivot in leadership from clergy-led, lay-supported to lay-led, clergy-supported. And these are just when we looked at congregations or faith communities that seem to be moving well through this time, it's picking up on some of their strengths. It's also listening to a variety of people and congregations and lay leaders and clergy leaders on what's most needed. So let's dive into these one at a time. And I will say, if there's something that comes up in one of these that you would really like to ask a question, I am open if you just unmute and just say, hey, I have a question about this. That's how I typically present. So the first pivot is from fixing to listening, discerning, and experimenting. And here's the words. Many churches and leaders are tempted to expend their energy trying to fix inherited structures in order to reverse the decline of institutional affiliation, participation, and resources. Christ's local church will endure, but voluntary association institutional structures largely can't be fixed. Instead, churches should focus on discerning and joining the triune God's presence and movement in their personal and congregational lives and in their neighborhoods. This means presence, curiosity, deep listening, and experimentation. So for us, this is a key part of the adaptive work that we've already been doing. As things broke down internally, a lot of churches really focused on making things work the way that they had before, especially shortly after COVID. There were a lot of pushes to get Sunday school or Christian education going back up, to make sure that worship happened the same way, and or building things happened during the pandemic, and a lot of things had to be fixed. And time and resources and energy all went into sort of being internally focused. And time again, that is not how the gospel calls us. We aren't called to be church in order to have a building just for us. The focus of the gospel is to get to know God, each other, and neighbor more deeply and in love. And so we have been encouraging people to think about how can they best have conversations and invest their time and their presence, not just within the 4 walls of their church, but in the wider community. And this could be taking up spiritual practices such as, we say practices of presence, like where are places you could go to learn about new things. And this is really just putting yourself in the place. You aren't even having any conversations yet. How often do people put themselves in, for instance, a new international market that might be in your space? How often might they go and maybe do 1 week's worth of laundry in a laundromat, even though they have their own space at home, so that they can see other people that maybe they don't always see? Or how can they find, just be in a space, whatever that space looks like, that's not where they usually are. So that is practicing presence. Or you can practice relationship, and you can attend sports games of the local youth if you wish to. That's something that I know that many leaders already do. But are there other events, fairs or something that would help you learn about more of the cultures that are around you in your city or town? Are there other ways that people, and again, this is not just clergy at this point. This is how can the people of your congregation start to really listen into the context where God has placed your community. So what we want you to do is listen, and then to think about where God might be already up to something in that space. And then doing some experimenting about what gifts and resources has God already placed in your faith community that might be able to add into what is going on in that space. So that the movement is, instead of fixing what we have or protecting ourselves, is into what is God doing in the wider context and how can we join in. That's pivot one.
Dawn, before you go on, this is Carol.
Mhm.
Could you say a little bit about the phrase voluntary association institutional structures largely can't be fixed? What does that mean?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very fancy language coming out of Charles Taylor's work, as well as Ted Smith's work. And that is that from the 1950s, well, really from the 1800s through the 1950s, 60s, we had something that the church was a voluntary association. And that was people came to church because that was how you gathered with other people to do mission work, to raise funds, to do things in your community. It was people volunteered their time and their energy in order to make the church work. All of the connections with those voluntary associations. And by the way, the church is not the only one. You can look at the Rotary Club, some of the Masonic bodies. All of these associations are breaking down because people don't join sort of a third party, as in a church association, in order to do good in the world. They more likely, if they want to build houses, they will join Habitat for Humanity. They will go directly to the nonprofit that's doing that work and often can do it better and more efficiently than church. And they are looking for meaning in their lives. Now we are in the age of authenticity instead of the age of volunteer association. And many people in the upcoming generations, I would say from Gen X down, are looking for a place to make spiritual meaning of their lives. And as beautiful as for, liturgy and the Sunday morning worship services for many, it does not necessarily offer the space for that deep spiritual conversation or meaning making that many people are really looking for. And so if we try to just fix the building or we just try to fix our programs, we are going to make them better for the people who love that, but it is not going to reach into the next generations. That's a piece we already knew before the pandemic, but it's become even more stark since the pandemic came through. Did that answer that question for you, Carol?
Thank you. Yes, there's a lot there.
There's a lot there. There's a lot in each one of these. And that's why I'm stopping after each one and just saying, you know, what do you notice? Other thoughts or questions?
Maybe I'm kind of seeing this, not fully, but it feels to me like then that's a kind of heartbreaking critique on our worship and discipleship and the Sunday morning service. If people are showing up and not feeling that they're connecting with God and growing and finding meaning. And I just wonder about, it may be the reality that the model isn't working, but there's a part of me that just wants to push against, but then what do we do in terms of Sunday worship, of gathering as the church, in ways that it will be what it is intended to be, as a place where people feel connected with Christ and find meaning. And so that's just something I'm processing in this data.
Yeah, it is. I think it is an important thing to process. And what I can share is that one of our shifts as Luther Seminary is we are staying away from like, here's the 2 best practices you can do to fix this problem, because we think that every community will have to engage this in their own way. And so coming at this, Jennifer, I think that the questions you just asked are really important to ask the people around you and the people in your community. What is it that you find most life-giving in our worship? or people that were there and were, now have not gone, ask them what they find life-giving now, and maybe how did they find that before, or did they not? We have oftentimes been so afraid of answers that we haven't asked the questions. And I think that has not served us well in the church. It's kept us from seeing shifts as they happen. I think God's people have shifted how they worshiped and shifted how they've been in community all throughout history. And we, for whatever reason, found this really great structure that we sort of cemented in place. And we've been very slow to really listen to how people hear God and experience God. And so to really open up those questions again, not in a way that makes us feel threatened as leaders, but that realizes that God really is speaking in the lives of the people around us, and how can we lift that up, nurture it, grow it. Thanks, Jennifer. Really great point. Any other questions? Okay. Pivot 2, from membership to discipleship. This was another one we saw coming. So we're talking about the institutional membership again, becoming members of a church. Inherited patterns of institutional membership often assumed discipleship rather than intentionally cultivating it. Following Jesus in the power of the Spirit is not optional for Christians. Churches that thrive will orient their communal culture around practices and relationships that connect faith and daily life, answering questions of meaning, belonging, hope, and purpose. This means learning God's story in Scripture and embracing and embodying a holistic gospel. So the short version of this is that many leaders made an assumption that if people were in the pews Sunday after Sunday, that they were absorbing, that they all believed the same gospel, that they were all on the same page. And we've had quite a few things, whether it's political divides on whether to wear masks or not. There are certain things that came up that so many leaders came to me and said, I thought I knew the people in my congregation, and I thought they were hearing the gospel that I thought I was preaching, and now I'm not sure. And so knowing that being a member or just showing up on a Sunday morning is not enough. And I know how hard some of you have worked to have Bible studies or other things in order to increase knowledge and discipleship. What we are noting and what we're wondering about this pivot is, how can we actually take those people who have the theological leadership skills, have the theological knowledge, to really disciple people, to sit with them in conversation, to help maybe not just give them information through a Bible study, but help them start reading the text for themselves and listening for God's voice in the text, to really focus on that discipleship work. And maybe some of the other things which I've been in the parish, all those other things that get on your to-do list that many other professionals, trained professionals, would never do those tasks in their own areas. In other words, we would very rarely expect a doctor to make sure that they are cleaning the doctor's office when they're done, and that they're straightening things up, and that they're keeping all of the records. We would think that someone else would be assisting, and we would work really hard to make sure that someone was assisting a doctor with that, even if it's in a volunteer capacity in smaller towns. And so one of the things we're wondering about is, how can we make sure that our theological leaders are focusing their time and their energy on the tasks that only you can do. Only you have been trained in these things. And some of the other pieces, are there ways that others can fill them, and or do they truly need to be done? And that opens up all sorts of questions again about how we gather, what's available. So this is a big piece of not just membership. You're going to come and you're going to give money and you will just do the things, but really do the discipleship. Any thoughts or questions about Pivot 2?
Dawn, I'm going to jump in again here because this is one that I'm hearing more of and really resonates for me. Having been a Lutheran my entire life, I really do feel like, as someone who participated in worship and was on church council and whatever, that it was just assumed that I knew, and I certainly had a basic knowledge, but where I was being encouraged to grow and explore was mostly up to me to find out or figure out or find that source. There didn't seem to be an intentional way of bringing people along in their individual spiritual journeys once we were past confirmation. And goodness knows, most of us were 13 at the time or something like that. And I also think that we have a lot to learn from each other, not just from our theological experts. Not to put them down, but just to say that it might be less intimidating if we shared our stories with each other.
Absolutely.
About our journey.
Yeah, absolutely. We do that as part of the adaptive work that if you've heard of Luther Seminary's Faithful Innovation or our book Leading in Faithful Innovation, that's what some of that work is about, is sharing stories with each other. I have, in some ways a similar story in that this Lent, I decided I would offer up faith coaching to anybody on our council or staff that wanted to take me up on it, just to see how this went. And I was meeting with someone who had been in the congregation a very, 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 very long time. And when I started working with her, I realized that her story was much like yours, Carol, is that she had been there and she had been going on Sunday morning, but she never thought about reading scripture herself or what that might tell her. She never actually thought about looking for God outside of the walls of the church. And it was, I just have to share, it was just such a beautiful line she shared with me yesterday. And her line was, because the week before I said, how about if we just stay curious, and where you see something beautiful and loving that you wonder if God might be there. That's your whole assignment for the week. And she came back and said, I was blown away. Is that really all I needed to do was pay attention? And there was a much more of a conversation that came after that. But I don't know that we've put some of these, basic spiritual practices into place. The ease of a worship service that happens week after week that has a set liturgy. There are beautiful pieces and comforting pieces to that, and those prayers that we learn by heart don't always teach us or draw us into a deeper relationship. Mm-hmm. And so thinking of ways that we can to work on that, to bring others along to have those conversations. You're absolutely right, Carol. It does not have to be a theological leader. There are just ways to share. One of the stories that we ask people to share with each other, again, not theological leaders, just groups who have gathered, are, where have you felt most spiritually alive and why? And that's just telling a story from your life. And amazingly enough, oftentimes we have to do a little bit of digging about what does spiritually alive mean. And so the fact that we have to unpack even that description, that people are confused by it or are mistrustful of that phrase, I think says a lot about the imagination and the curiosity that we need to start bringing up in our people.
In fact, I chuckle still about a story that a spiritual director shared. She's been a member of a Lutheran congregation for many years, but she comes out of a different Christian Protestant tradition. And in her experience, people shared their spiritual journeys very openly. And she said when she got into the Lutheran church and she would ask someone a question designed to ask them for a response about their spiritual life or their spiritual journey, she said that she would get this horrified look like she had asked them to undress in front of her.
Mm-hmm.
So we Lutherans apparently have learned some shyness about this too, as well as not experiencing it as broadly and deeply as we could.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely is something across all of our mainline and in other, other traditions that we need to think about. That just sort of taking part in the general pre-written stuff is wonderful and good. And like I said, it gives me great comfort. I love being able to go and hear certain words spoken over me or for me or for the community. There's sort of automatic that I don't have to make up. And if that's all there is, I kind of just do it by rote and it never touches my heart.
Dawn, there are a couple of things that I'd like to add to this that are going on in my church that I find really interesting. So every Wednesday morning, whichever pastor is preaching that Sunday meets with a group of people, whoever wants to join, around the scriptures for the upcoming Sunday. And that group of people helps to shape what structure the sermon takes based upon their insights into what the scriptures are saying.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
one thing. And then another is that during Lent, they've had a tradition of doing Lenten devotionals, oftentimes written by the staff. And then recently they've started including lay members. This year they added another layer. So they took several books and asked each of us to read the book and then prepare a daily devotional, 4 different devotionals, based on that book. And I'll tell you what, the devotionals are astounding with what people are getting out, and they're not lightweight books. They're Henry Nouwen, they're Richard Rohr. And it's just, I get up in the morning and I used to just have my coffee and then go read the LA Times. Now I have my coffee and I go and read my Lenten devotional first. There are just some simple practices that we don't often think about doing, that can really invite discipleship from your congregation.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Joanne. We did the group Bible study when I was in a mission congregation. And if I had my druthers and my preferences, I would never write a sermon in another way than in community with the people with whom I'm in community with. I would want to do that every week. Let's keep going. For now, we can come back and do more questions at the end, but I want to make sure we get through all 4 pivots. So pivot 3 is from one shape fits all to a mixed ecology. The term church conjures up for most people a particular institutional expression, a dedicated building, staff, programming focused on Sunday worship that is too narrow for today's context. One size or shape of church does not fit all. We need a mixed ecology of inherited and innovative forms of Christian community that connect with people where they live, work, and play. And part of this, again, is wanting to think about not just that Sunday morning as being where all of our attention is being placed. And at least when I was being trained, there was a little bit of suspicion, if you were, about churches who met at a yoga studio or people who had dinner church. And I find it really funny that I was one of those people at one point, and then I ended up with a Mission Start congregation in a school. So God got back at me for my narrow-mindedness on that one. But what we're finding is that if you think about swimming pools for young children, there's that zero entry where there's that slope that allows you to, first dip your toes in and then get into deeper places. We are finding that crossing the threshold of a church for all those reasons of division and illness and things that are in the media about what Christianity is or isn't, that for someone who has a spiritual hunger in their heart, stepping over the threshold of a church is like diving into the deep end. They don't know what they're going to find on the other side. They don't know if they'll be able to leave easily. They don't know if they'll be welcomed for the fullness of who they are. And so having places such as a dinner church or yoga worship or whatever outside, there's a large group in Michigan and Wisconsin that does outdoor hiking worship. So those pieces, they have a key role to play in finding spiritual community for people who don't feel like they fit in our typical spaces. Andreas, I see that you've blipped in a couple of times. Are you trying to ask a question or is your mic just on?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
I didn't know my mic was on. I'm on a phone and a car, so I just been trying to be silent.
Okay, nope, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure that you were getting a question in if you were trying to.
No.
So questions about that mixed ecology. A question I'd like to ask you is if you are a leader in a settled congregation with a building, how supportive are you of other endeavors in your neighborhood or your context? Or what other endeavors or ministry opportunities, other than Sunday morning, sort of the typical things, might be welcomed by your community? And to open your curiosity to that. I love to hike. I'm up in Minnesota. I hike a lot of times in the north, and in the forests, you'll see there are many, many different kinds of trees. And there are reasons for that. Some of them will be, those pine trees in the wintertime, they will help buffer the wind because of all the foliage they still have. I'm looking at Carol's background right now. But there are other pieces they don't do as well. They don't have the same nutrients as the maples. And so it takes a whole ecology of trees in order for them to all live well. And one of the things we are wondering more and more at Luther is, what does a mixed ecology of churches look like? And how do we support one another? I think this is a little bit beyond what we used to have with the emerging church. Emerging church a lot of times was maybe being held in the same location or a slightly snazzier location with younger people and more upbeat music. These mixed ecologies can be actually quite a bit different. Again, it might be in the church or it might be at someone's house.
So thank you, Dawn. I'm sorry my video is not working ever since my my battery died on my computer here, but I got back. But yeah, it actually coalesces well with a conversation in a previous one of these coaching workshops that I recall late last year with cultivating organic faith communities. A couple pastors from the Pacific Northwest that we had here, I recall talking about creative church. Well, I mean, so a number of different types of, doing church in alternative spaces. And I know Pastor Emma was one of those at Echoes Church. I'm sure that's in Bellingham. I'm sure Sarah can fill in the blanks here, but They were talking about all kinds of examples that they've engaged in various spaces. So Wild Church, they called it, is a hiking ministry. Creative Church, thinking through, some of the different, offering different forms of art, like you have in like a painting workshop or something, like a wine and paint night, that is, popular in the community, and kind of going off of that. A service church doing a service project, of course, pub church, or so lots of different examples that they gave. But I know that that there were a lot. This is exactly the sort of thing that they were talking about.
Yes, yes. And in the Northwest, they excel at this, because the people that go to a Sunday morning service is so much lower than in many other places in the country. They have found a lot of different ways to gather people and talk about who Christ is, and then think about how how does communion fall into this? How does baptism fall into this? So asking really good questions and thinking about where and when certain parts of our communal life fit together. Thanks for sharing that.
Go
ahead. No, go ahead.
I know in a way this is still a little bit, people coming to us, but one thing, it's really important at St. John's, where I'm at in Palm Desert, community involvement. So for our Lenten series this year, we're inviting speakers from our ministry partners to come and share about, what they're doing out in the community. Because maybe like a lot of us, we have older folks who maybe physically can't, but they can give. And so things like Desert Arc works with people with disabilities, also does shredding and recycling and, hiring cleaning crews and stuff. And we're partnering with them to maybe do that and already doing that. And so really those connections between what we can bring and then what they can bring, and fostering those partnerships with our local rescue mission and Galilee Center and a lot of those other nonprofit organizations in our community.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, partnerships become very important in this. It's not all about, again, when you say one shape fits all, it's everybody can come and our building can hold it, and our building is the food shelf, our building is the clothing store, our building, in fact, maybe we don't need that big of a building, and we need to partner with other spaces or other groups that do it much better. And our worship space is where we gather the missionaries together and refuel them and refill them and send them back out for mission. So all of these things, again, I have I don't want to share with any of you, these are the expectations, or this is the way it will look everywhere. What I do want to lift up, as I'm sure your great coaching network does this for you, is what questions should we be asking right now to think about how God might be needing us to be in this time and place. We have one more pivot to go. The pivot in leadership from clergy-led, lay-supported to lay-led, clergy-supported ministry. Increasing numbers of local churches are already lay-led by choice or by necessity. As the professionalized model of ministry erodes, the future will be largely lay-led, clergy-supported, rather than clergy-led, lay-supported. We have an opportunity to reimagine leadership in ways that faithfully mobilize all the gifts of the body of Christ to participate in God's mission. What I want to share on this one, because this is the one that brings an existential crisis in identity for our pastoral leaders. And what I want you to hear is, if you are called to professional theological ministry, I do believe there will be a need for you for a long time. We need someone to be studying and thinking about the systematic pieces, that does the deep scriptural study, that spends time in formation. And because of the way that current church pieces are being funded, until we learn better ways of funding, there may not be a way for every congregation or every community to have their own personal professional theologian. And so more and more, in the ways that Carol and Joanne have already brought up, there are ways that lay leaders are able to bring about their knowledge, their spiritual leadership, their ability to lead. And rather than clergy being the one to think of all the ideas and then having to recruit all the people to make sure that the clergy's ideas get played out, we are seeing more strength coming from leaders who take a more coaching stance with the people in their congregation to hear how God is already using them in their daily lives, in the spaces that they're already in, and helping resource those lay people to live a fully discipled life in their daily lives, rather than trying to make so many activities and programs comes just out of the church and only through clergy. So that is the general piece of Pivot 4. I know that Sarah's going to stop me pretty soon, but yes.
Dawn, quickly, it seems to me that this one ties directly into Pivot 2 from the layperson's standpoint. If we are being brought along as disciples, we will be better prepared to take on some of these leadership positions alongside our clergy. And I don't think it's an either or, one is better than the other. I think it also, saying with that, we might be moving to a lay-led, clergy-supported model. It's also pretty daunting from the lay side of the picture too.
Yes, it is. I think one of the beautiful things that has come up out of sort of our coaching courses, though, we do a segment 1 coach training, and it's not unusual for us to get either current seminary students or new graduates. We have some scholarship funds that's now bringing that opportunity to them. And one of the things I'm hearing more and more often is that they, after taking that course, they will lead differently because they have now been taught how to listen to how God might be working in another person's life and helping that come to fruition, rather than approaching a conversation with ideas in their head, such as this person would make a great Sunday school teacher, or this person would make a great person on my altar guild. And they go and they listen to that person's story in order to see if they will fit the leader's vision and how to recruit that person into the leader's vision, rather than the leader listening to see how God is already acting in the other person's life and lifting up and encouraging that growth. So it's a very interesting shift, and one that coaching will play a very important part of. Let me get through one more slide, and then I'll take whatever questions might be available with time we have left. Just a few brief observations. These pivots are less about acquiring new skills or knowledge. They require reframing of focus and activity. So it's a change in how you do things, but not necessarily skills. The pivots are hitting existential identity questions for leaders. I mentioned that with the last one. And let's be honest, the pivots are not necessarily welcome or wanted by the congregation. Carol, this plays into what you just said. When I say going to lay-led, clergy-supported, there are a lot of leaders that are like, oh, I don't want to go for that. So there is a key piece of this that we really have to reframe. And there's a sense of many leaders being embarrassed or ashamed that they feel ineffective right now. And so part of this work in a coaching stance or otherwise is helping people realize this is, again, is something around the country. These are major shifts and are right in the middle of it. So being there to listen to your colleagues, to be good coaches, is a really key piece that needs to happen for all of our leaders right now. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And Sarah, do we have time for a couple questions? Okay, questions. Jennifer, you had already opened up for one.
Oh, it was about earlier. I think Joanne mentioned Richard Rohr, and I had just included in the chat a beautiful article in his blog, that very idea of Christian, what we mean when we say Christian, but then really is that discipleship, and is it just belief, or is it how we're actually living? So just wanted to share that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there's some great, I think for me, the beautiful piece is not that, again, that we have all the answers, or there's something just absolutely singular or whatever happening at Luther Seminary or whatever, is that I see ways that this is blossoming and living out all over the world, actually, but definitely in the country, and it takes its own form. But one of the beauties of being at Luther Seminary the way that I am is I get to see the various places and ways that this is popping up. And I get a chance to lead in this particular way, in this particular space, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you, Dawn. These are really important conversations for the church today. And so thank you for helping lead those conversations. I have one pushback, I guess, is that I would say on that last slide that these pivots are indeed about, require reframing and reorientation, but they also require new skills and knowledge. I would argue. I don't think we are trained for this work in seminaries right now, and so I think there's a we don't have the models to lead this type of transition, and so I think it does, and I know the seminaries are moving, slowly as seminaries move in this direction, but I think it does require a shift in training, and I think it all hinges on that. I love that Carol pointed out back to that second pivot, because I think it all hinges on that move to discipleship, from membership to discipleship. To me, that's the centerpiece. And it is, as you pointed out in that last slide, a challenging transition for congregations to make, which I think, that's why it requires new training and new models, because it is such a deep shift. Because it's a challenge, because you can, I've thought about a shift in this model for years, but as long as you play the game of classic congregational ministry, you can trust that the offerings will continue to come in and we can hang on a bit longer. This kind of radical shift requires, kind of upsetting the apple cart and trusting that there's going to be something positive that comes out of it. So it's a big change, big shift.
It's a big change. It's a long term. And the one thing I'll point out is that I said the pivots are less about acquiring new skills. And the reason I said it that way, there are definitely new skills to be learned. But so many times, if we think that it's just about new skills and then we try to do technical fixes, if I just do this one program, if I just do this, if I just learn this one thing, if I just read this one book, that all will be better. And so I think what I was trying to do with that sentence was to say, there's a bigger shift that has to happen here. It's not a technical, one skill is not going to do it. This is a reframing. And in that reframing, you will definitely need new skills.
Yeah.
But if you don't do the reframing first, the skills are not going to cut it.
Absolutely.
So all of that is true.
I think too, part of what helps me in this journey is thinking about cumulative mass and the idea of tipping point and influencers, and that you don't, like the whole congregation, there are still going to be people who are, but it's a Rohr quote, transform people. So this article about discipleship, shared with the council, shared with the staff, shared with the leadership team. I mean, if you you may not get everybody in the congregation, but if you get enough people in the congregation to kind of see this discipleship, and then it's less work on you, because this is a team effort. So to me, I'm really the importance of the key leaders and key people in the congregation, and doing a lot of deep work with them to help that transformation, by the grace of God, happen.
Yes. We talk a lot about just starting with a few people. Yeah. All right, Sarah, you have those documents to go ahead and share, whether it's in the YouTube notes or in the chat, however you want to share those. Other than that, it's been lovely to be with you. I'll turn it back to Sarah to do her closing pieces.
Thank you so much, Dawn. I really appreciate the whole conversation. I've been this violent bobblehead in my little window because I agree with everything that you're saying and everything that you're sharing. And I feel like I've been saying it, but I haven't been as articulate as this presentation has been. And I really appreciate the resources that you're sharing. We did have a request for your slides to be shared as well. If that's a possibility, you could just email that to me so that I can forward it to our participants. That would be wonderful. And I want to ask our participants here today, if you find this space helpful for you, please invite others and share with them the resources that we share with you today, but also just the space that we hold here every first Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. so that we can present you with these kinds of resources and then demonstrate for you the example of how coaching fits alongside this stuff and how coaching can help you is a resource available to you from our synod. And there's even funding to help pay for the coaching so that it's not a burden of expense on you, the pastor, or you, the congregation specifically. So just to highlight all of that. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Dawn, would you mind closing us with a prayer? That would be really lovely.
I would be happy to. The Lord be with you.
So with you.
Oh God of creation, of new life, we ask as these leaders go through their day that you may allow your Holy Spirit to blow gently or heavily in their brains and in their hearts, that they might be able to see the new possibilities in front of them, whether it be in people or resources or where they are in their space. Continue to give them imagination, continue to fill them with your faith, and help guide them on a path that brings to reality your kingdom here on earth. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, all of our participants, Pastor Matt, Pastor Casey, Pastor Andreas, Pastor Jennifer, Pastor Diana. Thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dawn.
Dawn.
Bye-bye.